What are creepy facts about your country that most foreigners wouldn't know? Story 1. The visitable famous catacombs are roughly only 1.5 kilometers long. The entirety of the underground system, combining bunkers, refuges, underground pubs, and rooms back to the 18th century, all linked through an endless corridor maze, is 250 kilometers wide. It's forbidden to explore this part. Not open to the public, the municipality has been condemning doors and accesses to it. And there have been stories of people disappearing in there. Yet there's more than often people exploring them, reopening accesses, making parties, or camping in there. Oh, and in 2004, cops found very large galleries with living areas, bars, and a cinema all carved from rocks, along with phones using pirated electricity, a voice recording system playing loud dog noises to scare off people from entering, and cameras recording rooms. When the cops came back with more people, everything was cleaned up, and all that was left was a note saying, "Don't search." Story 2. If you dig in the ditch of an old road, you are likely to come across corpses from the Civil War. On my way to college in Madrid's Ciudad Universitaria, I walked through a park known as El Jaime, famous for being the ground of one of the most famous battles during the Civil War. It's not uncommon for archaeologists to find human remains, weapons, unexploded bombs, and that's where I walk every single day. In that same park, there is a lonely Virgin Mary as the only remnant of an old building that was destroyed. Also, in the facade of the School of Medicine of the Complutense, University of Madrid, you can still see the burst of gunshots. Story 3. Portugal basically started the transatlantic bondsman trade, sold and enslaved millions of African people. There were far more bondsmen in Portuguese Brazil than there ever was in the USA. But people only talk about the Americans being the bondsman monsters. Portugal was the first European country to attack Japan. It enslaved so many Japanese people that the Emperor of Japan threatened to declare war against Portugal. As an interesting fact, there was an African bondsman brought to Japan by the Portuguese who became the first black samurai. Story 4. Australia. Snakes are everywhere. Always look down when walking. Australia is home to some of the most dangerous animals in the world, with over half the top 10 deadliest snakes residing on the small continent. The most common snake bites in Australia could be prevented by seeing the snake before stepping on it. Australia's deadly snakes, that are also nocturnal and hunt at night. Black mambas and eastern brown snakes are aggressive and will not only chase you, but even continue to attack cars, trucks, and even tractors. Always gives me anxiety in movies when people stomp through forests without looking for snakes. Not to mention, we also have scorpions, spiders, bullet ants, crocodiles, cassowaries, and that's even mentioning our aquatic wildlife. Story 5. Our state had business with the mafia in the mid 900s while they exchanged information, political and economical affairs, and probably participated in very bad things, TM. We also had a lawsuit called State Mafia to look into this deal, and we have proof that this happened. But to this day, almost everything was buried, and the responsibility was given only to a few people. The rest of them kept their position in politics until the day they died. Story 6. I don't think most foreigners would know about the stolen generation in Australia. A vast number of indigenous Australians were systematically removed from their families as children and put into white homes and institutions against their will. This has caused trauma and displacement on a generational scale that's still being felt today. Lots of people who know they're indigenous but don't know which land they come from. Very, very sad. Story 7. Not my country, but my city. There was one really big murder in my city. It was huge. The murder house is actually just a few blocks from the house I grew up in, and I remember finding the girl that did it in the class photos on my middle school walls. There is a book written on this called Runaway Devil. I feel like that was the start of where we have been going. Since then, it seems to me like murders and crime have been slowly increasing, and to top it off, I know of a suspicious death in both my apartment building and the one across from me that I have been searching for info on and is completely being covered up. The police call for service was not even listed for either day. No info has been released to this day, nor would they answer any questions, and the crime map of our city has conveniently been down for maintenance quite some time. Makes me wonder what has happened in other areas that nobody knows about when you take it all together like that. I never leave my apartment besides to go work night shift at the hospital and get groceries, and I still manage to run into the weirdest people at my own home in those few trips to other places. The one time I did not lock my hallway door coming in, my neighbor from 4 floors up walked in, forgetting to use the stairs, but left easily enough. I did not panic too much. Another night, a man comes banging on my window at 3 a.m., screaming for help. After heavy debate, I let him in because it is cold. He has no shoes and was obviously just scared. He explained his friend was under the influence of substances and drinking and had attacked him. I let him calm down and gave him directions and sent him on his way. Just wild, this is such a small town and so much crap happens. Story 8. Maybe not really creepy, but kind of interesting. During World War II, a lot of us were neutral or collaborating with the enemy. When the war ended, everybody started saying they were part of the resistance, when the real resistance was actually 3 to 5% of the population. But because it sounds cool, we started shouting everywhere that they were helping the country when it's not true at all. Might sound strange, as you guessed. English is not my native language. If you see mistakes, you can tell me. Story 9. There is a national cemetery in our capital city, and this cemetery is huge, like the size of Vatican City. Anyways, most people only busy their loved ones in the front side of the cemetery. But all the way in the back, there's a section where there are empty coffins. The people that are in charge of taking care of the dead are required to maintain a tomb for 10 years. After that, the family needs to do it. But most of the time, the family forgets about them, so the people in charge just take out the deceased and throw them out in a big pit, and the coffin is left there in plain sight. There had been sites of cults in that area. Many people have reported that they hear screaming from where the pit is located. Witches have been spotted doing some weird stuff. They would leave a curse on an item, like a shoe or a phone, and if someone touches the item, they will be cursed. Story 10. Australia's white colonial history is comparatively short, from the late 18th century. So we don't have hundreds of years of castles and medieval haunted houses, but we have a lot of space, and this drives people mad. It's a conundrum. When you can go anywhere, in any direction for as long as you want, you realize there's nowhere to go and no point in going. Every step leads to death. If we built our prisons in the desert, we wouldn't need walls or fences. Where are you going to go? On a clear day when the heat is low, so no shimmery haze comes off the earth, I once saw the curve of our planet. It was beautiful, but eerie and weird because I was so small and insignificant that it gave me a strong feeling of the tiny temporary value of my life. The Australian desert can really mess with your head without drugs. A famous Aussie criminal in a chat with me about how bodies are discovered marveled how anyone was ever found because, and I quote, Australia's a big place and shovels are cheap. Story 11. Until the assassination of John F. Kennedy, ending the president and or vice president was punished by the state where it happened. Meaning, if Lee Harvey Oswald was able to be on trial, he still would have faced the death sentence, but under Texas law. Somehow, the president and or vice president are seen as civilians, meaning if the law was still in place and the assassination took place in an abolitionist state like Michigan, the first to ban the death sentence in the USA, you can guess how the results would be. Since 1965, the assassination of the president and or vice president has been made a federal capital offense. That means even in an abolitionist state, you can still face the death sentence. One flip side is if it involves an abolitionist country and state-level capital crime, non-federal, usually a civil matter, then extradition isn't as difficult. That was the case in 2006 when a British national took out his U.S. national wife and daughter. He fled to his native England, an abolitionist nation, but since Massachusetts is an abolitionist state and the victims were civilians, the guy was extradited quickly and is serving life. Story 12. Not necessarily creepy, but a lot of foreigners don't appreciate how cold and wet the UK can be all year round. It may not look wet, but even on a beautiful summer's day, that wind can bring the temperature right down to around 5 to 10 degrees Celsius. Couples from warmer countries often don't bring sleeping bags or tents thick enough to endure the nighttime temperatures. It's a serious issue that living in the countryside, I've always noticed. People get out of their tents in the morning with about 60 layers of clothes on when I have a pair of shorts on, and that's it. Story 13. We have a special day dedicated to so-called ailele. They are some kind of fairies, but look like beautiful women with angelic faces and long white dresses. Old people, and even teenagers, admit that they used to see them dancing around fires in the forest and singing magical songs in order to attract you. They may seem innocent, but they are very dangerous, and any kind of interaction with them can hurt you and even change the way you look, especially your face. It is said that you can occasionally hear them calling your name in the middle of the night, but you should not respond as they would come for you. It's a common and well known legend in my country, and it always scares the crap out of me when I hear stories about them. Story 14. I live in the city of Tübingen, Germany. There's not just facts about Germany, but some things about this city too. I'll name two things. One, in the church in the city, there's a picture engraved into the wall of a man with broken arms and legs sticking out from a wheel off a horse carriage. It represents the breaking wheel. The church is on a hill. The story goes, criminals were tied to a very large wheel. They would beat you, then roll down the hill. Being trapped under the wheel, all your bones were broken. If you survived, they break your neck. We also still have cages hanging from buildings where you were left to die. You were eaten by crows before you died of thirst. 2. After 10 p.m., you can see the ghosts of Templar knights riding through the city on their horses. Story 15. Despite being a country with continental proportions, more than 8 million square kilometers, we've got a notorious lack of atypical natural phenomena. No volcanoes, no earthquakes, no hurricanes, no tsunamis. It doesn't even snow anywhere in the entire country. On the other hand, we're in the list of mega diverse countries with 6 continental biomes. Okay, people, it does snow here. Kind of rarely and only in a very small part of it, but it does. It was a generalization because the huge majority of us have never experienced it in the country. I'd risk saying more people from here have seen snow while traveling abroad than people have within the country. Sorry for the exclusion, I was just making it practical for the argument. Também fora o Bolsonaro. Story 16, Tau Tau Mona, Zombie Ghosts of Micronesia. The spirits of the ancient islanders take the form of mutilated, rotten corpses, missing limbs, and even heads. As spirits, they harass trespassers and anyone who disrespect the jungle. When they touch you, they leave a painful pinch or hand-shaped bruise on the victim that makes you sick, and the cure is to see a witch doctor and apologize to the Tau Tau Mona. They also shape-shift into stray pets to lure kids into the jungle, as well as possess kids to get them lost at night. My grandparents had a bolt lock on the top of the door to keep the kids from going missing before they moved to America. Story 17. On the 23rd of Des, the day before the biggest day of Christmas, this is Scandinavia. We are the reason Christmas is a thing. Big J was born in August or something. And the original holiday was just several days right after the winter solstice. One would do well not to be alone. One famous story is that a long time ago, the family and serfs were going to a several-day celebration in the household. A girl was chosen to stay at home and watch the house, the livestock, but was directed not to leave for any reason on the 23rd. She did as was told, managing what she was supposed to, but on the evening of the 23rd, she started seeing lights in the courtyard. There was beautiful singing, and she could see through the hazy glass that there was dancing and a bountiful banquet. There were people outside asking her to come join them. After all, her real family had left her to rot while they made merry. So eventually she did. She left her house and partook in the fun, ate of the food, drank of the drinks. When her family returned on the 24th, the girl was nowhere to be seen, taken by the elves. Story 18. La Llorona, the crying woman. Walking by the rivers of Mexico, looking for the children she drowned. Story goes, she was a beautiful young woman with 3 kids and she fell in love with a man. The man told her he couldn't marry her because of her children, so she drowned them in the river. Afterwards, she went to the man only to find he had another woman. After finding out the truth, she threw herself into the river and drowned, and now her spirit haunts the rivers of Mexico, as she looks for the souls of her 3 kids. You can hear her scream, "Oh, my children." And if you are alone at night walking by a river, and you hear her, you better run, or she will catch you and drown you into the waters, especially if you are a child. Another one is La Lechuza, a witch that can turn into an owl and sounds like a baby crying. Legend says the witch was very clever and would always look for a home that had a newborn in it. When it would find a house, the Lechuza would wait until nighttime and make the sound of a baby crying, distracting the mother thinking a baby was outside. While the parents would be distracted looking for this crying baby, the lechuza would climb through the window, snatch the newborn, and eat it, leaving only bits and pieces of the baby for the mother and father to find. Now, if the witch was really hungry, it would wait until dusk and make a whistling sound instead to trick small children to go outside. Once outside, the small child would be carried away and never seen again. My cousins and I have actually heard the whistling of the lechuza many times, and we were always warned to be indoors if there was no light outside. My grandmother would tell us the moment we heard that whistling, that would be the last thing we would hear before we got eaten. Story 19. Well, vampires. People often think that vampires came from Transylvania or something like that, but they came from Serbia. First known vampire was Petar Blagojevich. After his death in late 1700s, a lot of people died under strange circumstances in the village where he lived, and his wife reported seeing him at night. People decided to dig up his grave and found he didn't really decompose. His beard grew, and they found blood on his mouth. After him, there are a lot of other cases. Also, the word vampire is also of Serbian origin. Story 20. I was hiking on a mountain that is supposedly sacred and haunted. It's in Indonesia. One of the rules is there is no wearing on the way up, and nothing we wear can be colored green. I didn't believe any of it, so I just wore a green hiking bag, and my friends swore all the way from bottom to top. During our first night camping, we started to hear unintelligible human whispering from around our tent. Afterwards, something that looks like a human hand pressed against the tent and repeatedly tried to claw its way into the tent. It continued for hours, and we could not sleep. The next morning, all of our shoes, which were supposed to be neatly arranged, are everywhere around our tent. Never going there again. Story 21. Australia doesn't have many boogeymen because we've got so many real things that can end you, but one we do have is called the bunyip. It's a typical legend meant to scare kids away from rivers so they don't fall in and drown or get eaten by bunyips. They're shape-shifting monstrosities with many forms, most of which are large, dark, and amphibious, like a horse with the skin of an eel, or a mermaid werewolf, or a jaguar made of leeches. They have a loud and a terrible roar, but are also capable of mimicking other creatures' calls, sounding just a little bit off. They prowl the riverbanks and snatch other creatures by the legs, dragging them into the water to drown and devour. Their stories don't get told much on account of how unreliable their description is, and you'll get better results just by mentioning the crocs. Story 22. In Estonia, in Haapsalu Castle, there is a story about a ghost, which is called a White Lady, or Valjdam in Estonia. On the 19th, there was a man in this castle, and one day he brought a young lady to the castle, but he had to keep it a secret because he would get in a lot of trouble. The lady put some man clothes on so she could live there normally without anyone noticing that she was a woman. One day, the guards wanted to search her room, and they found women's clothes there. Then every higher up in the castle gathered together and chose to let the woman starve to death in prison. But they thought that punishment was not enough, and they then decided to wall her in the castle wall. They gave her some bread and a cup of water and then covered her in wall rock. Then, a few days later, people started to complain that they saw a silhouette of a woman with a white dress on the night when there was a full moon. And the legend is believed to this day. Story 23. Australia for this one, you've got your Yowie and Bunyip stories. But I grew up on Aboriginal scary stories. Kurdaicha man, type of magic man or shaman or shapeshifter from Central Australia. Now I'll tell this story from the perspective of a family friend. White Cop holds much respect in this small Aboriginal community he patrols anyway. Few kilometers down the road is another town, so he's always traveling between. It's on dusk, and he's got a call for a disturbance in the other town. And he hops in his cruiser and starts driving 20 to 30 minutes into it, comes across an Aboriginal man walking on the side of this road and asks if he needs a lift. The man waves him on, so he keeps driving, arrives in town, and now it's nighttime, so it's quite dark. He finds out the guy he needs to get is already at the station, so he strolls into the back to check over this guy. And he's all sketched out in his cell. Person at the front desk calls the cop over. And as he walks to the front and his eyes widen as he comes face to face with the old Aboriginal man who he had passed ages ago. He rolled into town with no cars behind him. So how did this man manage to get here? They ask what he needs, and all this old man says is, "I want him." And he points back towards the cells. You can now hear this guy in his cell going absolutely mental. Not angry, just upset and scared. Somehow they convince the old man to leave. But he hangs around outside the station. Okay, this is where the story gets weird, and I don't expect people to follow and believe. But this cop was driving around this town, and he'd catch glimpses of this old man in different areas. Impossible to run to each location for his age. I'll end it there. It all gets hazy, the story I can edit tomorrow if I ask a relative. For the rest, though, story 24. My grandparents over in Mexico always tell me and my cousins this one. It's because the story of La Llorona. Another thing to note is that there's many versions of this tale. This is the version my grandparents tell, so here goes. So, a long time ago in a Mexican town far, far away, there was a beautiful woman who was happily married and with kids now. Their father traveled a lot, but came when he could. One day, he didn't come home later, as she and her boys were getting water from a river. She saw her husband with someone else, and she then got so angry that she drowned her own kids. But she came to her senses and realized what she did. She then took her life in hopes of being with her children. She is now cursed to stay on Earth and look for her kids.